Welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead and start here. Welcome to Poudre School District's Long Range Facilities Planning Public Forum. This is our 7th of 9 public forums that we've been holding out in the community. And really the purpose of today and all of our forums is to tell you a little bit more about the proposed long-range plan, and more importantly, hear from the community members attending today, answer your questions, and get any clarifications that you might need. My name is Kim Newcomer. I will be your facilitator tonight. I'm actually not a PSD employee. I'm a community member as well. I have the simple task of just keeping us on time and on topic. I don't know about anyone else in the room, but May is a crazy time of year, so we really are committed to keeping you here until 6:30 and then sending you on your way so you can take care of your home business as well. Before we get too far into a discussion around the format of tonight, I want to welcome our panel as well as the Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Sandra Miser, and just give you an opportunity to welcome everyone.
Okay, thank you so much for coming, those of you who came tonight. We have 2 board members with us from the school board who are listening, and then we have a couple community members who are part of the process who are also going around to the forums to listen on behalf of the community to what people have to say and what your questions are. So we'll get on with the show.
Wonderful. And we're going to make sure you can hear Dr. Miser here, whether we need to give her the handheld or up her microphone a little bit. It's a big room. So wonderful. How tonight will work is we're going to hear a quick 20-minute presentation from Dr. Miser, which is really highlighting some of the key points of the proposed plan. Again, the real intent tonight is to get your questions answered. When you walked in, you received a handful of index cards. What we're doing is asking you to write your questions on those index cards and then pass them forward as the evening goes on. So as you're listening to this presentation and you have ideas, questions, please jot them down and we'll get through those in the Q&A portion of the evening. This helps us get through questions quickly, and it also helps us capture those questions so that we can share the answers later. Along those lines, if you go to the PSD website, which is psdschools.org, you will see on the right-hand side of that page a link to the Long-Range Facilities Planning webpage. We have all the questions and all the answers from all the forums that we've done thus far posted online, because we know sometimes it takes sometimes it's easier to go back and actually reference those. So that is the format of the evening. Again, there's no limit to the amount of cards you can submit, so as you have questions, jot them down. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Miser to get us started.
Okay, that's better. So I'm going to do a very short presentation to give you the big ideas and to walk you through the plan. If you have documents in front of you, you have the short version of the plans and some of the key ideas. If you go online where Kim mentioned, you can see the long detailed plan, which includes maps and census numbers and all kinds of other details. So feel free to look into all of that if you'd like. So I'm going to start with a short video that communicates our philosophy about the physical buildings and the environments that our kids are in. We believe that it does make a difference the quality of the actual physical buildings that students are learning in. And that's what this is about.
Poudre School District, leading the state and nation with a tradition of excellence. And now, we're actively planning for the future. So what does that look like? Students learning in first-class facilities. Through building improvements and new construction, our students gain opportunities to pursue their passions. With thriving partnerships, we find strength through community. As we grow and change, community support is essential to student success. We strive for excellence every day. With a solid foundation rooted in tradition and community, we're laying the groundwork for continued success. Poudre School District, building our future together.
So as a district, we have a comprehensive facilities master plan, and it is usually updated once every 7 to 10 years. And that is to keep us looking forward for what our facilities need and to plan for the future. So the last time this was updated was 2007, and we are working now on the next update. So we started in July of 2014, and what you have in front of you, a summary of it, is the draft plan so far. We look at demographic projections, we look at census data, birth rates, observable trends, current student populations. For example, we look at the size of our kindergarten class and project how big will they be by the time they get to kindergarten, to high school. And then we look at all the growth that's happening, all of the construction that's planned, all of the construction that's being requested that hasn't been approved yet, and we work very closely with everyone in the area. So as you know, growth is happening primarily in the southeast side of the Poudre School District and the northeast side. So our long-range facilities planning group is a group of experts that got us started on this project in last July. We have PSD staff, we have planning experts from the city of Fort Collins, we have people from Larimer County, we have private and architectural firms, private construction and architecture firms, and also we hire a demographer every time we do this who does a consulting firm that does this for a living, and they are called Strategic Resources West, and that's the group that we have used in the past as well. So at this point, we're planning for a year of talking to the community about this plan, and we would bring the final version of it to the board in March of 2016 for their final approval. Okay. So we have two types of needs that are happening right now. One is the aging buildings that we have, keeping them up and upgrading those facilities, as well as growth. And where do we need new schools? If you look at the population of Larimer County and what the projections are, oops. What's going on with my clicker? There we go. If you look at the population of Larimer County, you can see the projected growth. We do not include all of Larimer County, but we do feel this growth, and I'm sure that you see it happening all around us. What is going on? So these are the enrollment projections that we have, that we had as of last October. If you look at the numbers in last October, in 2015, we were projected to have 28,500 students. We started school with over 29,000. So at the beginning of this year, we were already 500 students ahead of projection. So if you think about the number of students, if they were all in one place, that would be an entire school's worth of kids. So we are growing, and we are growing fast. So as we look at ongoing needs and needs for new construction, I do want you to be aware that this plan does not include any proposals for school closures. I believe the last time the update was done, there was a lot of conversation in the communities around possible school closures, and we're not including any of that in this. So what we are doing with our existing buildings is looking at renovations. What kinds of equipment do schools need? Playgrounds, landscaping. The principals in the district are working with the SACs in each building and with each community to talk about what are the desires for upgrades to current existing buildings. Then our facilities department also has an audit of all of the buildings, so they also have a list of infrastructure needs that they believe are priorities for each building. And our Community Facilities Advisory Committee will help us join together those two lists and help us to arrive at a final list that we would consider for going forward. And that'll take a long time, and it'll be an interesting conversation at each school. So for growth, we're looking at what do we do now, because we have intense needs in some areas right now, as well as what will we do over the next 5 to 10 years. So as we look at now, we're looking at modular classrooms. We're looking at schools that have almost no room for anyone other than neighborhood schools, so there's very few seats available for choice. So we're seeing a lot of schools that aren't allowing other kids in. And where possible, we're looking at buildings where we may have a district program located inside a school building, and we're looking, can we take that program out and put it in a building that has more room so that they can use all of their spaces. And then sometimes modifying existing space. Then in the midterm, we're looking at some very small boundary changes, and we're looking at building some new schools and additions on schools. So these are the schools that immediately over the next couple years will need modular units. All of these will likely have one or more added in the next couple years. If you think of one modular as 2 classrooms, there's one on each side, and if you use 25 students as an average, you can think about 50 students per modular. So when you look at how many modulars, you can think how many hundreds of students aren't fitting inside the buildings anymore. All of these schools are having trouble having room to allow anyone who doesn't live in the neighborhood. I want to stress that our school choice policy is not changing at all. It's designed to coincide with state law. State law says Colorado is a school choice state, so by law, parents need to be able to take their children to wherever they want, assuming there is room. And under no circumstances can a district policy allow for a neighborhood student to get bumped out for someone else to come in. So if the school has a boundary, then neighborhood students inside that boundary always are first priority. And so as we look at schools that are filling up, they're filling up with students just in the neighborhood, and there's less and less room in many places for anyone who lives outside that boundary. So at Riffenburg Elementary School, we're looking at moving early childhood out of Riffenburg, which is unfortunate, but they're filling up and we can move early childhood to other buildings, and so that's what we're looking to do. At Wellington Middle School, we're looking for more modulars. And at Fossil, we have some dry science rooms that we're converting to wet, which means we are plumbing them. By having science classrooms and labs that are available to be used for full-on lab classrooms, it increases the capacity of how many students we can have, which may not make sense, but it has to do with scheduling and how many science classes you can offer. So here is the new growth that we are planning in this plan. We're proposing a new elementary school in the far southeast corner of the district, a permanent addition to Zach Elementary School. As I mentioned, early childhood coming out of Riffenburg. We're proposing a small boundary change between Riffenburg and Laurel. Riffenburg is crowded and Laurel has a little bit of room. We're looking at a new middle school, high school east of I-25. That would be on Prospect, where we own a 100-acre parcel of land. This would not be a combined grades 6 through 12. This would be a middle school and a high school sharing the same building, but it's operating as 2 separate schools. If you were around when Fossil opened, that's the way Fossil opened. It opened with Kennard sharing the building for 2 years, and then Kennard was built. Fossil filled up, and Kennard moved to its own building. So we're looking at using that same strategy here. Then the same strategy up somewhere in the Wellington area. We do not have the property for that one yet. But in that case, the growth is projected to occur slightly differently. We believe the middle school is the most urgent need in Wellington, and the high school numbers would come along later. And then on that Prospect site, we need another athletics facility, a complex. We need more fields for students to play on. We're crowded. If you have students that compete in any kind of athletics, you know how difficult it is to find field space for all the different athletic teams that we have. So did we get the, there we go. What is going on? I think it's the chair, maybe. There we go. Nope, it's not the chair. No, I don't think so. Okay, let's go really, really slow. All right, so the new Southeast Elementary School would be located south of Bethke and east of the highway, obviously. And so way down in the southeast corner. Then it would be constructed between 2016 and 2018, projected to open in the fall of 2018. So it would relieve pressure at Bethke, here at Bacon, and also at Timnath. And we can talk to you in more detail about those numbers and also show you a proposed boundary for which students would go where. I mentioned that we would not be doing a lot of boundary changes other than Riffenberg and Laurel, but each time you build a new school, that school needs a boundary drawn around it, and so it will scoop children to go to the new building. Most parents enjoy going to the new building, but normally what we've done in the past and what we hope to be able to continue is to phase students, to allow all students who want to go, but if a student is, for example, a 4th or 5th grader at one school, we would try to let them finish at the school that they are in the older years. Just won't stay. Thank you. We'll just do it by hand. So I think I mentioned all of this except that the middle school, high school on the Prospect site is designed to relieve pressure at Fossil, at Lesher, and at Preston. So its boundaries would scoop up some of the students from those areas to allow more neighborhood schools, neighborhood kids to be able to fit inside those 3 buildings. So the athletic complex would be multi-use fields, as I said. We only need, for example, for a football field, we only need an audience of about 6,000 students. Some people have asked us, are you going to buy Hughes Stadium? We have no need for a stadium that seats 30,000 people. We just need about 6,000. And we need multiple use fields. So we need baseball, lacrosse, soccer, we need lots of fields. If you've ever been involved with turf management, you know that you can't just continually play a field consistently and constant use without killing the grass. You have to rest the grass. And so we are proposing that this new complex, as well as some of the other key fields around the district, would be converted to synthetic turf to allow us to be constantly using fields. And that would be concurrent with the construction of the other fields, and it would be part of that complex there on Prospect. So this would be the timeline that we're proposing. Brendan, can you move to the right a little bit? There we go. This would be the order. I will tell you that the state of Colorado, as they fund us per student, the funding that we get per student does not contemplate the construction of new buildings. It's designed to care for the operational costs, the people who work here, the ongoing maintenance of buildings, but not construction. The way we fund construction of new schools in Colorado is by going to a bond and asking the community to vote for a bond. So that would be our funding mechanism to build these new buildings. We would go to the voters in the fall of 2016 with the presidential election and ask for a bond. And Dave can give you more information about what that bond might look like. Also, we've had some questions about whether we would consider building a pool, a competitive swimming pool. At this time, that's not part of our plan. It's just not a high enough priority compared to needing new school buildings. It also causes a huge ongoing cost to the district that we're not ready to assume. So that's the short overview, and we'll take some questions.
Great, wonderful. So again, I just want to remind folks, if you do have questions, go ahead and write those down on the index cards, and we'll have staff walk around and pick those up. In the meantime, while you're thinking of your questions, let me introduce the rest of the panel here. We'll start closest to me, and Brendan Willits, who is a planning manager for Poudre Schools. So thank you for being here. Dave Montoya, Executive Director of Finance. Todd Lambert, Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Schools, and Pete Hall, Executive Director of Operations. As you might know, and as I mentioned earlier, we've been doing these forums for the last couple of weeks. We've had just about 250 people attend, and we've had more than 400 folks watch online. So you'll see the camera in the back. We've also been asking people to submit questions through info@psdschools.org through email. You can do that after you leave here today, and we also have some of those gathered this evening so that we can go through those questions as well. So let's start with maybe just a little bit of context on where Bacon is right now in terms of capacity, school of choice. Maybe we could just do a little bit of grounding of the current circumstance.
Yeah, that'd be great. Bacon right now is in a neighborhood that you can look around you and see the growth, their utilization number. And when we say utilization number, each building has a capacity of the total number of students that can be there, and the utilization number is how much of that capacity is filled up. Bacon is in the mid to upper 90%. What Bacon is doing right now, Mr. Horkey and Mrs. Paduska are paying close attention to their choice numbers. As those neighborhood numbers go up, and that's what's happening here, they start to manage the choice numbers. And usually that starts with an incoming kindergarten class. As Dr. Miser said, we typically don't like to have students start with us if they're choice, and then ask them to go out of the school. They build relationships and a family atmosphere. But what you're going to see at Bacon is, again, Mr. Horkey and Mrs. Paduska managing that equilibrium of neighborhood kids having that first priority, and then how much room is left is available for choice. And I think you'll see that number slowly decreasing over the next couple of years. Maybe slowly is not even the right word, maybe quickly decreasing. And those are always difficult challenges. There's some guesswork to it, but I think in this building I've watched Joe and Alyssa manage that really well.
Are there any modulars here now or any plans to add?
There are not. It's a possibility. I think Brendan and I were talking earlier about the growth here and how rapid that will be. It'll depend on that. We'd like to first start by managing choice. If it comes to the situation where that gets so fast, that neighborhood growth goes so fast that the choice can't mitigate that, then of course we'd look at modular classrooms.
And then we talk about modulars, but there's typically 2 classrooms in one modular unit. Is that right?
That's
See,
right.
I'm learning something over
go.
the forums here. Okay, well then let's talk a little bit more about the proposed new elementary school. What kind of impact will that have on Bacon?
Not a lot. The new school will primarily take the majority. When we talk about the number of students that are going to come out of schools, and I feel like I'm talking right to this group right here. When the students come out and the new school opens, the brunt of those students are going to come from Bethke. Somewhere around 200 students of their current group. These are estimates now, somewhere around 50 to 65 will come out of Timnath Elementary, and a small portion on the southeast corner of Bacon's boundary down there. And Brendan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, just a little spot down there. So they'll take a few out of there, a couple of dozen, maybe 30 or so, not much. I don't think Bacon will notice that a whole lot.
So when we were in Timnath yesterday, I have to remember the calendar, we talked about a risk of underutilization of the school. Is there that same risk here?
No.
No. And what does that mean? Because I learned that last night. What does an underutilized school look like?
Well, again, the utilization number that we look at to be most optimum is somewhere around 90%, because what that does is that makes the most use of the facility, but also leaves room for neighborhood students moving in. We live in Fort Collins, people move here. And so we want to make sure our principals leave enough room to accommodate neighborhood students without going over 100% utilization. So an underutilized school probably, in my opinion, could be somewhere below 80%. We don't have a lot of schools like that. I think it's also important to point out that in Fort Collins, population growth and shifts change. Dr. Miser talked about Riffenburg. 6 years ago, Riffenburg was around 55, 60%. Now they're going to be in the mid 90% utilization because of neighborhood changes. So we don't have a lot of schools there, and we pay close attention to them.
Could there be a scenario where even a neighborhood child wouldn't get into their neighborhood school?
No.
And that's because that's like state law.
It's
State rules.
Sure. Well, any school accommodates the students that are within their boundary. We call those neighborhood students, and in the choice policy, those are students number one, first rights, and so we do not turn neighborhood students away. They go to their neighborhood school if they desire. There's a place for them.
Okay. Staying on this theme of the new elementary school, do you anticipate, or could it happen that older schools might be in danger of either closing or enrollment declines because parents are choosing their kids into the newer schools?
No, because I think when you think about the schools that are going to feed into the area that's going to make up that new boundary, they're all schools that are going to have rapid to moderate to rapid neighborhood growth already. Again, Bethke, Timnath, a little bit of Bacon. Those are all schools that are going to see those neighborhoods go up. Timnath probably most impacted early, but again, we're pretty confident that their neighborhood growth by, I think Pete talked last night, 2019, 2020, will go to that point, and they'll make that up quickly.
Knowing how population shifts and densities shift, and even looking at Fort Collins efforts in particular for infill, Is it easier, or is it been considered just shifting the boundaries to maybe use those underutilized schools now versus building new facilities?
I think that is one of the questions that the committee looked at right out the gate was, could we just solve this problem by moving boundaries? Keeping in mind that a boundary is not a fence, it doesn't keep people in, it just gives them first rights to their school. So just because you have a boundary that you belong to doesn't mean you have to go to that school. No, I think the boundaries would have to be long drives for students, long, skinny, strange areas that wouldn't be anywhere near. We're trying to have neighborhood schools, and so it didn't look like a practical solution.
Thank you. So again, staying with the new elementary school, we said southeast part of the district. Is there a particular site you're eyeing, and what are the factors that are going to go into determining where that site is?
Yes, we're looking south of Highway 392, somewhere along the County Road 5 corridor. There's not a lot of available property in that area right now. And at this point, it's, as Dr. Miser mentioned, on the far southeast corner of our district, actively pursuing 15 acres for that site, and then working around some of the potential landowners to see what's available. And like I said, there's not a lot down in that area, but that's where the search is.
I'm going to move us on to the idea of school of choice and our choice policy. I know the entire policy is online. I'm sure we've all read it page for page. But maybe you could just give us a quick summary of some of the factors and maybe some of the higher priorities that go into determining whether or not a student can choice into a school.
And remind them it's on the long range planning section where we have the documents that you have, but we also put the policy there so that it's easy to find.
I'll take a stab at that, but I'll do the best I can. Again, neighborhood students are in the neighborhood are number one, and we move away from that all the way up to 8 spots with, you can imagine the A spot is, and I don't have it right in front of me, but we're talking about students that live outside the district, have no affiliation with anyone, that simply want to move in. And Bacon has some of those students for parents being in this school, close to the line for another district. And in between there, you have all kinds of factors, whether it be sibling status, whether it be sibling status inside the district, sibling status outside the district. They go 1 through 8. Again, as Dr. Miser said, the details are online, but if you can imagine being close in and working your way out, and then affiliations with either siblings or children of staff members, and those get closer up to the 8. We take first priority always, again, as a neighborhood.
So we heard a little bit about, what did we call it? Limited school choice acceptance as part of an approach to managing some of the population growth in each of the schools. What does that really mean, limited school of choice acceptance?
What we're really asking for is our principals to pay attention, as I stated before, to that balance between choice students and neighborhood students. And so choice management would be when they start to see that neighborhood growth pushing the building to a high utilization number, they will start to limit the number of students they accept in choice. And again, in practical terms, for a principal, that usually starts with kindergarten. So we stop that so we don't have to run into that issue where students come in, and you're starting to see that in some of our buildings, and you're going to see it in this building as well. It's already started.
Yeah. So this is a good question. How can choice be seen as a benefit if the schools that you want to choice into are full or only accepting neighborhood kids?
Well, one of the nice things is that we have over 50 schools, so where one school may not be open because of its neighborhood growth, we have incredible schools all the way across the district, and we think that affords our parents a lot of options. So we think choice is still a good, viable thing for them, just depends on, again, what's open.
Right. This is a good tangible question specific to a student here. So this child will be going into 5th grade in 2018, and if by chance she is rerouted to the new school, are we going to quote unquote grandfather in students that started here as opposed to going through the choice hierarchy?
I don't think we made that decision yet, but anytime we open up a new school, we pay close attention to that. We don't want to have our students at those upper grades that have been there for a while have to exit. So we usually give them an option. But that'll be determined as we look at what the numbers are when the new school opens. I don't want to commit and say they'll be third grade up or fourth grade up. I think that's a decision we'd have to make as we got closer to the time.
I wanted to also just add a couple comments about how boundaries are chosen, because a lot of people are wondering, will I be in that boundary? A boundary committee will start in September and October, and it'll include the principal and a few other people from each school that's affected. And they will meet for several months and look at our proposed boundaries that our experts have put together and make suggestions. The board ultimately will decide on the boundaries and where to set them. But we hope to have that done by the fall.
Great. We're going to move on to more broad-based community impacts of new schools. So the first question is, how closely, or do you at all, coordinate with the city of Fort Collins, and how are they involved in this planning process?
Very. No, you do.
Well, considering the locations of the proposed sites, this is actually almost beyond the bounds of the city of Fort Collins, although currently the Prospect property is within the city of Fort Collins. The property to the southeast is yet to be determined as Fort Collins, Windsor. There's a lot of municipalities in that area. We have up north the town of Wellington is where we would be looking. So we work closely with the municipalities on the development of our traffic infrastructure, where property may be advantageous to be located, and take that into consideration. So yes, we work closely with all of them.
And then are they the entity that you coordinate with to evaluate traffic flow and perhaps street widening or additional stoplights and those type of infrastructure changes?
Yes, and sometimes we grow into a neighborhood. You know, as the area, and I'll just take the area around Fossil Ridge. When we built Fossil Ridge High School, there wasn't a whole lot out there. And through the course of the years now, 10 years, 11 years later, we've added stoplights, a roundabout, different start times for the schools affected in that area. It looks different. So we grow sometimes with the neighborhood as different infrastructure challenges come up. But in the beginning, we do try to set parameters on traffic flow and work with the municipalities on how that looks, along with our design team, and try to take all those factors in as we're starting to develop the plan for the school.
All right, I'm going to move us on to funding questions. I'm preparing Dave. You know, before we get into the specifics, I always think it's helpful for you to give us a quick overview of how is the school district funded, and particularly the difference between mills and bonds.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to give you the quick, concise version. I could probably talk for 3 hours about this. But basically what we're looking at is school districts in Colorado are all funded via state statute and a formula that resides in state law. So all 178 districts follow that same formula. Some districts may get more than others, depending on what their unique situation is, what the cost of living is, et cetera. But basically that formula is the one that Dr. Miser had mentioned earlier, that provides per pupil funding to the district, and that's our largest source of revenue. And that revenue really supports everything that you think of going on in the schools. So when you think about teachers and paras and office support and just the day-to-day operations, that money is really intended to do that. And what we find is, and especially in Colorado, is that per pupil funding is probably not to the level where it needs to be just due to the day-to-day operations. So that's a continued effort that we try to balance that. So the takeaway is that there's really no money there for construction. The other source of revenue, the other large source of revenue that the district gets is through what we call mill levy overrides. And a mill levy override is simply where we actually go out and ask the elected, the people, the voters in the district, for permission to increase property taxes for a set dollar amount. And we've had 4 examples of those in the district. We had one in 1988, one in 1996, one in 2000, and our most recent was 2010. Again, these sources of revenue, again, are supplementing the day-to-day operations and are not intended for large capital items like building of schools, things of that nature. So really what that leaves us with is the last and final option for construction. And again, Dr. Miser had mentioned that this is the way it works in Colorado, is for new construction, the majority of the time what you need to do is go out and issue bonds. And for those folks that don't know what a bond is, think about it as your mortgage payment. It's all it is we sell bonds on the market. Investors buy those. They give us the cash. We use the cash to begin the construction, and then our obligation is to pay those investors back principal and interest on what we borrowed. Very similar to a mortgage payment. And so that source of revenue is what we would be looking at to do the construction items that we've got on the long-range planning list for now.
Do we have a sense, I know a lot of the details are still being worked out, but do we have a sense for how big that bond number is going to be?
We do not have a sense as of today, but we will have a sense next fall. So one of the things so we've got the long-range plan up in front of us. One of the things the next step that's occurring now is we're working with the architects to develop the ed specs on these buildings, of which will allow us to then cost the buildings out. Ultimately, the cost of the buildings and what is in the long-range plan will determine how big that bond issue is. I will tell you that we have every intention of trying to minimize any tax increase that may be associated with issuing these bonds. We do have some of our debt portfolio retiring, and what that means is think about it as a mortgage being paid off. So we may be able to fill some of these new bonds in so the property taxpayers don't feel the large increase from a new bond issue. But really, it's yet to be determined, and the amount of any property tax increase would also be determined as we cost those buildings out.
So although we're working really hard to mitigate any increase in property tax, we're still anticipating that the new bond might result in an increase.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement.
Okay. You know, a lot of the conversation tonight has been about growth and development, and that's part of why we're having this conversation. How do developer fees play into funding of new schools?
So we do have we have agreements with the majority of our municipalities in the county out in our school district. And what happens is, as development happens, developers have kind of a choice. They can either dedicate land to the school district, which typically that doesn't happen. More often than not, what they'll do is they'll pay the fee in absence of dedicating the land. And I don't recall exactly what that is right here, but there is fees that are paid. They get remitted to the district, depending on the municipality. Sometimes the actual developers come into the district to make the payment. Sometimes the county or the city may be collecting it on our behalf. We have some of that money, and we anticipate being able to use that. And it's a legal restriction actually around these fees. We don't have the ability to use it for whatever we want. We have to use it for land purchases or infrastructure or planning. You can't use it for construction. So we will be tapping into those resources to buy land and to do infrastructure improvements where we can.
Great. So here's the, well, maybe more than $1 million question. What happens if the bond doesn't pass, if the voters don't approve it?
Well, I think that we don't have a plan yet. The Plan B, we've been calling this. We plan on having that as school begins next fall. Realistically, what we're talking about with the growth that we're seeing is that we would be talking about adding more modulars. We would be talking about doing all sorts of different items. I think that we might be looking at moving boundaries at that point. All the items that we've talked about that are less appealing become more appealing at that point because we don't have the bond.
Looking at the timeline, and this is a question I think we've gotten before, we're thinking that the issue potentially would go to voters in the fall of 16, and yet it looks like we're starting, in addition to Zach, and building the new elementary school that same year. Is that a realistic timeline?
Yeah, I think it is. In fact, we've done that in the past. We issue bonds right after the vote happens. In fact, it's advantageous for us to do that before December. So we hustle up and do that. We get the bonds issued. And then that cash is available to begin construction at that point.
So I'm going to try and link these. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Pete.
Yeah, and as Dave mentioned, we're working right now in the educational specifications for an elementary school, which could be similar in scope and to these existing buildings that we have now, the newer elementary schools, and then we'll start looking at the middle high schools. So, trying to get started on that now. So as Dave said, if initiative goes and it passes, we're moving forward, and then as they're issued, we can start to accelerate that process. So we're somewhat in design right now, trying to get ahead of that, anticipating that once the bonds are issued in, say at the end of 16, first of 17, we are moving. We did that with Zach when that came out of the ground, literally, and it just accelerated the timeline.
You know, this is a process that is very long-term and yet somehow feels very quick. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about how folks who maybe want to try and influence outcomes, whether it be the details of the long-range plan or whether it be boundaries, how can folks really plug into this process? And I'd say even more specifically, you know, how can parents and community members really help you craft what they view as the best responses, you know, particularly around those schools that they feel at capacity and they feel overcrowded, although they might not meet the district's definition of those things. So I guess a two-part question, you know, one is the long-term process, how can people plug in? And two, maybe for those folks who are feeling like their school is overcrowded, but they're not on the list for modulars or otherwise, can they advocate for some more resources?
Certainly, and I think the process that we're going through with the principals, talking to the community, the school community about what they want for those buildings, that would be the perfect place to start the conversation about feeling like, hey, you think we're not at capacity, but we think we are, kind of conversations. That would be a perfect place to start that conversation, and then we're happy to come out and talk at the school building or whatever type of meeting you'd like to have. I think that for the greater community, including the school community, keeping in mind that this is a kind of a county-wide discussion, most of the committees that we have working have already been filled up, other than the boundary committee has not started meeting yet. But I will say that we are closely gathering all this input and especially watching that email. So that info@pstschools.org is the place to send your comments, because we're collecting that, and we're also watching for themes and, oh, this is a one person who had one idea. Oh no, 400 people like this idea. So we're spending a lot of time. We've got great staff who are spending just hours and hours poring over all of this detail and trying to make sense of it all. So we are paying a lot of attention.
Great. Let's move on to the proposed middle school, high school on East Prospect. So I know it's too early because we haven't drawn our boundaries, but do we anticipate that Bacon Kids will, that will be their neighborhood high school or middle school for that matter?
Brendan?
As you said, Kim, boundaries not drawn, but we don't anticipate that. I don't think we've seen a scenario or consider a scenario where Bacon students would be anywhere but Preston, Fossil. That would be just in proximity.
We're talking about this combined middle school, high school model. I think I heard you say that's not the long-term plan, but can you perhaps explain to us how that would work, having two different schools essentially sharing the same building?
Sure, and one of the things that was mentioned earlier is that we have an example of this with Fossil Ridge High School. We actually had the middle school and the high school in there operating as separate schools. And then as that school began to build out to support the high school, the middle school was built and those students were moved to that location. So we do have some precedent on how that would work, and I believe we'd be following that same model.
Did we consider, oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Spicer.
I was just going to add that in the case of the Prospect site, the intention is that it becomes a high school, and that then we would need to build at the next bond, not this one coming up, but the next time we would need to build a middle school in order to be able to move those middle schoolers out.
Do we have any sense where that school might be?
Yeah, right now, on our website too, there's a link that shows where our available properties currently reside. And right now we have two properties on the east side of I-25. So the one is, as we said, the Prospect site, Prospect and County Road 5. The other site is almost directly across and just a little north of the Timnath Elementary School. There's about a 50-acre site at that location that if one was to think of building a feeder system up through that Timnath growth area, then that location we would anticipate would be one of the first considerations for that site. It's getting more and more difficult to buy large parcels, especially in that area. And for middle school right now, we're programming almost a 40-acre site. So it just goes to show buying those kind of parcels is becoming more and more difficult. But that's where that site could be.
Did PSD consider any other options or any other locations for the middle school, high school, outside of where you landed with Prospect?
Yes, we did. We had two considerations. The Prospect site is 100 acres, and then the other site that was part of what we've had in our portfolio for about 10 years is up, we call it the Mountain Vista area. It's just west of Anheuser-Busch, and there's about a 110-acre site up in that location. And as our committee worked together to come up with a place to put a middle school, high school, and then also considered the Wellington situation, it was determined that the Prospect site was much better located for the middle school, high school. A separate site for the Wellington middle school, high school would be located somewhere in and around Wellington, and the Mountain Vista site would be a site to be, perhaps addressed in the next bond phase as another middle school, high school. I mean, we've done some master planning on that site, but at this point, that's those are our considerations.
All of these new facilities and new schools, are we planning on including air conditioning in the design?
Yeah, some type of a cooling system would be designed, much like when we built all the new schools in the 2000 bond. We dealt with newer cooling systems, and as we look ahead and as technologies improve, we would anticipate including that.
So we saw a long list of needs in the presentation. How will you prioritize those needs to determine, A, which actually get included in the bond issue, and B, what gets done first?
See if I understand the question. It might be prioritizing needs as far as facility improvements?
Correct.
Okay. We will weigh out what the school, you kind of have a needs and a wants, and then it gets beyond that. And as Dr. Miser said, there's potentially a large list of items that could come in, but we've got several areas of study. Some are codes, some are necessary life cycles, such as asphalt, roofs, carpet. So those are large items, and then we weigh in where the school is as far as age, improvements that were done over the last two bond cycles from 2000 and 2010. And so it becomes a very difficult decision, and we'll have those line items returned to us. They've already, I've heard through facilities, the facilities department, that they've come back from the schools, which is great. And now begins the somewhat difficult process of looking at what is out there, what the schools have, what the other departments have looked at, balancing them out against prioritization of, again, life cycle codes, things like that, and then we just weigh it in with all the other school needs. And again, it's going to be a big list, and we have to, we're going to have to pare that list down with help from our community facilities advisory committee, and just it's a joint decision as we move forward into the fall to try to come up with a list that comes back to the schools.
We will be very transparent during that process so people know exactly where they stand at each particular school. And also we're trying to be as fiscally conservative as we can be, because we recognize we're asking for more taxes, hopefully not very much more. And so as the construction costs go up, the new construction obviously has to be a priority, but then some of the needs in the buildings are also a competing priority. And so we have to look at the size of the bond that we would ask for, how much money are we talking about, and the appetite of the community, the willingness of people to vote for it, depending on how big it is. And so all of those numbers come into play and help us to decide how much should we ask for, because we don't want to ask for the moon.
For those in the audience, I want to remind you again, if you have any last-minute questions, we have about 10 minutes left, so please feel free to write them down. Otherwise, I'm going to continue on my list from earlier today. We talked a little bit, but very briefly, about the relocation of district-placed programs. Specifically, I think you mentioned early childhood moving out of their current location. Where will we house that program?
Specifically, the one we moved this past year will go to Beatty Elementary. One of the things we pay attention to with district-supported programs, if they, like an early childhood model, requires some parent work for travel, bringing kids to and fro. So if we're going to move something out of a geographic area, we try to stay tightly aligned. So if we move out of Riffenburg, the best options would be O'Day, Beatty, schools that are in close proximity. And in this particular case, as we've moved them out, this last one we moved out is going to go to Beatty Elementary next year. So not too far away, not right next door, but just down the street.
Are there other programs or other similar district offerings that will also be moving around?
That's still, we anticipate that's a possibility. We have a couple of programs that serve students with special needs, where we have some travel there. And of course, just like in the process for what we did with early childhood, we'd apply the same concept in deciding where those go. Room has to be available. A lot goes into that. Staff, transportation, how well equipped the building is. So we anticipate it, but nothing specific right now.
How are we addressing schools that currently are nowhere near capacity or perhaps are even underutilized? Are we doing anything as a district to help bolster enrollment at those locations?
I don't think we don't target a specific school to bolster that. They have their neighborhood students. When we manage choice, sometimes that diverts populations, and of course we support all of our schools. We think they're all exceptional and unique and have a lot to offer, and what we have found over time is those particular buildings that maybe are somewhat underutilized, they ebb and flow a little bit depending on where they are geographically, but no, specifically no, we don't say a school here is underutilized, so we're going to take this drastic action and try to bolster enrollment. We let the neighborhood enrollment go. Now, inside those particular schools, sometimes schools will make decisions about programming that they may find to be more attractive to families with some supply and demand, and we certainly give them that free choice and support them when they do that.
All right, I'm moving us on to the athletic facility. We talked a lot about the new middle school, high school, and I believe the new athletic facility will be at that same site, that same location. Can you give us a general sense of, how much space does the athletic facility take versus the schools?
Wow, that's a really good question, because if you look at perhaps a complex with a multi-play football, lacrosse, soccer field surrounded by 6,000 seats, much like French Field, there's a footprint. And then depending on what we determine that we need for other outlying fields, as Dr. Miser mentioned, we have needs for there's baseball, and there's, you have different levels of baseball. There's varsity, junior varsity. The girls' athletics can use the junior varsity field for their softball. Then you look at soccer fields that might be used for practice. So depending on what we decide that footprint might look like is still yet to be determined. But that's what we talk about when we say multi-play. It's not just the football, soccer, like a one field. It's other areas that teams can come to, or the teams that will be actually housed at that site will utilize.
We had a lot of questions last night, and I'm sure still some curiosity around that site planning effort, and when does that take place?
So we attempt to look at all of our properties and develop a master plan that can suit various scenarios. So we have numerous plans, and we've talked to the local architects, and we've looked at these sites and developed a couple different scenarios for each site that we have. As far as the infrastructure, regardless of how the bond turns out, we still need to make improvements in conjunction with local municipalities, and those will go forward, road improvements, and other infrastructure costs. But obviously we're working with the architects, and we're waiting for the input from the school and the architects as far as the educational specifications. But we have already drawn up master plans for all of our properties, regardless of our plan to currently build on.
So how much say do school administrators get in the planning and processes going on within their schools, as well as the big picture?
When you say input, could you give me an example? What you mean by that input?
I'm going to speak on behalf of whoever wrote this, but I think what they're saying is how much influence do site administrators, school administrators have over what improvements take place at their
Okay,
site,
I
as
got
well
you.
as what improvements take place on the district level.
So there's probably two ways to go with that. In an existing site, one of the things we've done, Pete and his team have already reached out to the principals and asked them to work with their school accountability committees and their teams to determine some priorities at their sites. And of course, depending on the site, that determines the priorities. As we look ahead to new construction, one of the things we've done that I think is pretty sharp is that we've brought the principals that are in this particular building style. That would be Rice, Bethke, Bacon, and Zach. So those 4 principals, just a week or so ago, we brought them in and said, if we were to potentially utilize this footprint again, what would you want different? Where is there a door that could be something else? Where would a room be better utilized? And the architects take that into consideration. So we try to plan ahead as best we can for savings and efficiency.
We only have a few more minutes left, so I guess our final question. This is presented as a draft plan, and knowing that we still have some public input and listening to do, how much do you see it changing before finalization, if at all?
I guess that's the question we're all wondering. At this point in time, it is our best plan. So we're going to listen for a while and see if there are any major considerations. I think what we're really listening for is what considerations did we not think of, and what impacts might happen that community members could anticipate that we didn't. So we're just digesting the information now to see if any of it is important information that might make us shift our plan a little bit.
Great. Well, I promised to get you out of here at 6:30, but before we say our goodbyes, I'm going to let Dr. Miser have any last comments.
Well, just one more time, thanks for coming. Thanks for being honest and asking your open questions, and please feel free to stay in touch and watch the process as it goes.
Absolutely. And as a reminder to everyone, all of the questions and answers will be posted online at psdschools.org. If you think of anything post-event, please send an email to info@psdschools.org. And with that, I think it is 6:30 on the nose. So thank you to our panel, and thank you all for being here today. Have a good evening.